This video is brought to you by you guys. Thank you so much for the continued support. Check me out at patreon.com/Erica Griffin. Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd likes to film stuff, and it is time for part 2 of the Galaxy S8 and the Galaxy S8 Plus full in-depth review. And in this part of the review, I'm going to be looking at the more technical side of things, such as talking about the battery life, the performance, also taking a look at how the cameras perform. So let's go ahead and take a look. So the first thing that I want to talk about in this review is the performance of these devices. I have spent several weeks with both of these using them side by side, so I have a pretty good grasp of what the performance is like. Now keep in mind that these are the Snapdragon 835 versions, not the Exynos ones. I have not had a chance to play with the Exynos devices, but I have had a chance to pit them against other devices, even other Snapdragon 835 devices. So again, I have a pretty good understanding of what these are like. So firstly, I have extensively benchmarked and tested the S8 and the S8 Plus, and performance on average between them is very, very similar. So performance-wise, you should be happy with either of these devices. So on average, their CPU scores have been very similar, and their GPU scores have been very similar as well. Of course, these are just synthetic benchmarks, and it really pays to look at some real-world examples, and that's exactly what I did. I love using GameBench. So here is GameBench, and within GameBench I like to test Riptide GP2 for frame rates because it lets me look at if they're hitting 60 frames per second and how much they're hitting 60 frames per second. Plus I can jack up the graphics pretty high to make it as intensive as possible. And you can see that they're very, very similar. You can take a look at the frame rates just to take a peek at the trend of the frame rates. And there you are. You can see that both of them can handle 60 frames per second for several minutes. This one's hitting about 5 to 6 minutes before it really starts to struggle a little bit. This one starts doing it at like 6 to 7 minutes. It's about the same. So I found it awesome that both of these can sustain the 60 frame per second frame rate pretty well for several minutes. That's something that's not very common among devices. I was also able to reproduce this on the benchmark side as well. So here is the Manhattan battery test underneath GFX benchmark. You can see that it goes for several runs, so it's several minutes before it actually starts to throttle, and you can see that their throttling behavior looks pretty darn similar. So that again goes with the evidence that they perform pretty similarly. And then the less powerful T-Rex benchmark, you can see that they go for many, many minutes. Both of them do, before they show any signs of throttling, and again, it's very similar behavior. So I've been pretty pleased with the graphics performance of these devices. Yes, they throttle, all devices do at some point or another, but their performance proves to be pretty good. So I got curious and compared it to the LG G6, which is another new device this year. But it has the last generation SoC, the Snapdragon 821, the same as the Google Pixel, though it is clocked a little bit higher. And if any of you have been curious about how the LG G6 performs in comparison to the Galaxy S8, or even to the Google Pixel, which is last year, I haven't been too pleased. This one does throttle a little bit, but its sustained performance after that is pretty darn good. I've been very happy with the Google Pixel. Not so happy with the G6. I believe there's going to be an LG G6 Pro, and I'm happy to hear that. So for the CPU difference between the LG G6 and the S8 devices, it's really not too big of a difference, but where I have seen that difference is in the graphics performance and in the sustained performance. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Geekbench scores. You can see that it's not anywhere near hitting the 60 frames per second. It looks like it wants to approach it, but it just can't. That's probably LG implementing this to make sure it doesn't overheat, and also for battery life. And you can see that it's also aggressive in throttling underneath GFX benchmark as well. So immediately you see it drop, and it keeps dropping. So really not the best in graphics performance. But in CPU performance, I don't really notice a huge day-to-day difference between these guys. Now, if you're curious how the Galaxy S8 devices compare in CPU performance to other Snapdragon 835 devices, here we have the Xperia XE Premium and also the HTC U11. So right here we have Geekbench 4 pulled up, and we can see that the HTC U11 and also the Xperia XE Premium actually habitually perform a little bit better than the Galaxy devices do, but it's still within like a 5% margin. Now here we have PCMark pulled up to take a look at GPU scores as well, and there really aren't any very meaningful differences here. But on average for day-to-day, they feel very similar in terms of the CPU performance. I really think that you guys are going to be happy with any one of these devices. Then taking a peek at GFX benchmark to see how these perform compared to the Galaxy S8 devices, it's all very similar across the board. The only thing that really sticks out here is the difference between the Sony XZ Premium, because the interface is rendered at 1080p instead of 4K, or even Quad HD, like all these other devices are. So you can see that the on-screen benchmarks for the higher level tests are quite a bit better. But once you look at all of the off-screen tests, it's pretty darn similar across the board. Taking a peek at sustained performance between all of these guys, here we have Game Bench again, with my same favorite game to check out, Riptide GP2. Now unfortunately, Game Bench is not working on the HTC U11, so I just kept GFX benchmark open to see how it's doing with sustained performance between all of these guys here. We know that the Galaxy S8 devices can hang on pretty well at 60 frames per second for several minutes. Taking a look at Manhattan long-term battery benchmark, we can see that the HTC U11 is able to sustain performance for several iterations before it starts throttling, though it does throttle pretty heavily after that, and it kind of just maintains itself there after that. But the interesting thing is with the Sony gameplay. Now, again, this is rendered at 1080p, and I can see that we're hitting pretty much a perfect 60 frames per second the entire 15 minutes that I ran this benchmark. So I'm going to have more time to mess around with the Sony, but it looks like having 1080p really does well on the graphics front for the Snapdragon 835 devices. So they're all pretty good performers. I would say on the graphics front that updating to the Snapdragon 835 devices is worth it. For the CPU, So now I want to move on to talking just about the Galaxy S8 devices. We just took a look at a bunch of benchmarks to see how they perform, and also looking at true practical gaming as well. These are very powerful devices. There is absolutely no doubt about that. The question is, how do they perform in just daily use? Samsung has revamped their TouchWiz. It looks a lot more simplistic now, but I can tell you guys that on the interface front, that these are not the smoothest devices out there. I do see quite a bit of stutters and lags. Now, I realize that this may not be relevant for the Exynos devices, but these are the Snapdragon 835 devices, and from time to time, I do get some lags. So if I'm in an application and I hit the home button, lag city. Switching between apps, opening up the camera application, and I expect this probably to get worse over time. So these are not the smoothest phones. Going about the interface, I can sense that general lagginess as well. When I picked up the Sony XZ Premium, and when I go back to my iPhone, it stands out pretty badly. The Sony XZ Premium is a very nice and smooth device. So for those of you guys who are hoping that lag whiz is over, it's not. This is just something that's inherently tied into what Samsung is. You get an extremely powerful phone with tons of features, but it's pretty lacking on how smooth it is. Out of the box, I think it feels really smooth, but once you start getting updates and you start playing around with it and installing things, that's when I start noticing it. There are times, though, that it feels more smooth than others, and I really haven't been able to pin that down to anything. So I'm not trying to say that these are always terribly laggy, but it does happen. Please let me know of your experiences, but I haven't been so impressed. So RAM, how does it do with RAM? Both of these have 4 gigabytes of RAM on them. And I have run this over and over again with and without Disco Mark, and I can see that I can get about 9 to 10 apps open, and I can cycle between them. Let me know on the Exynos version what it's like for you guys. Are you getting better RAM management? One thing that people are talking about is that some of the devices have UFS 2.1 and some have UFS 2.0. It looks like the Plus devices have UFS 2.1, and the little ones have UFS 2.0 storage. But honestly, in day-to-day usage, I really don't notice a difference. Sure, you can benchmark it, and you can see that there is quite a bit of difference between them. But I care most about how fast apps open, and they look the same to me. So let's try Riptide GP2. Dink. Same time. There you go. Now, if you wanted to take a peek at my Android bench scores, here you go. Here's the sequential read and writes, random read, random writes, and yeah, you can definitely see that benchmark-wise, UFS 2.1 is faster. But in my real-world use, it really hasn't made me much difference. So how about battery life? Well, here we have PC Mark again. I was able to run the Work 2.0 battery life test, and I was actually quite shocked to see the difference. This is a 3000 milliamp hour battery and a 3500 milliamp hour battery. And I did try to get the brightnesses as close as possible. And I was getting about an hour and 40 minutes more on this device. Even with the bigger display, that bigger battery seems to help. Now, as for my real-world usage results, I'm able to get 5 hours of on-screen time on both of these, although I have an easier time hitting that 5 hours on this device, and I can even get about 6 hours, where this one's really hanging around that 5-hour mark. So yeah, I'm happy to say that that 500 milliamp hour battery does make a difference. And according to my calculations, that is a 16.666666% increase, and it is enough to offset the bigger display. So now moving on to talking about audio. Let's start with the speaker on the bottom of these phones. This is a single mono bottom firing speaker, and I can hear some definite improvements over last year. I thought that the Galaxy S7 Edge sounded more quiet, not as clear. So even though we have a water-resistant phone, I think that Samsung did a better job not making the audio sound as bad as it did. It's not the best sounding speaker still, but it definitely will get the job done. So we do have improvements for the speaker, but what about the audio quality through the headphone jack? Well, I'm happy to say that there are improvements over last year as well. Now, I am not an audiophile. I am definitely a video and display person, but from what I do know, the Galaxy S8s are using the Qualcomm aux-stick audio codec with support for 32-bit audio. So over last year, we've got a stronger amplifier so you can drive higher quality headphones. We've got a better signal-to-noise ratio, so the noise floor is cleaner. We should have cleaner audio. We've got a nice flat frequency response, less stereo crosstalk, lower total harmonic distortion. I know that many people were really complaining last year how terrible the audio sounded through the headphone jack. So much improved, but of course it's still not at the level of the LG V20. But hey, I'm not going to complain here. Now moving right along to talking about connectivity, I have had no issues whatsoever with either of these devices with reception, although I have had a little bit of an issue with Wi-Fi on this AT&T Unlocked model. Sometimes it says it's connected to the internet, but there's no internet connection. It will do this a couple times a day. I've seen other people report the same thing, so it looks like a bug and it should be fixed. I'm not seeing this issue on the T-Mobile version at all. I've had a chance to fully mess around with the GPS on both of these. I think that it's quite accurate. I do a lot of walking, and it's even accurate enough to use for walking, for directions. So really no complaints there. Now moving right along to talking about data speeds. The Galaxy S8s are the first devices that are capable of gigabit speeds, and T-Mobile is the first network to implement that. So I have a T-Mobile SIM that I put in my Galaxy S8 Plus and also in the Galaxy S7 Edge, just to see what type of speeds we're getting. Now, I am not getting gigabit speeds. There are a lot of factors that interfere with that theoretical number, but I am definitely getting higher peak speeds on my Galaxy S8 Plus than I am on the Galaxy S7 Edge. So I'm peaking at 118 megabits per second just here in my house, where the highest I was getting after several runs on the Galaxy S7 Edge was 84.11. So that is an increase, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to say, well, gigabit speeds are just impractical. Well, that may be so, but what we're getting here is a faster device, and it does show. Those gigabit speeds are supposed to apply for Wi-Fi as well. So this is one fast device. So how about Bluetooth 5? There's been a lot of hubbub about Bluetooth 5. People are talking about it. The Galaxy S8 devices have it. But while both of these devices contain the hardware, my understanding is that until we get the Android O update, the hardware isn't being utilized because there is no support for Bluetooth 5 inside of Nougat. So thanks for the marketing, Samsung. At least your device is future-proof. I do see that Samsung has created a dual audio feature, and being able to simultaneously use two Bluetooth devices will be a feature of Bluetooth 5, but according to Gary at Android Authority, I have to really thank him for doing the research he did. The dual audio feature on the Galaxy S8s has nothing to do with Bluetooth 5. The dual audio feature is using Bluetooth Classic, which devices use for transferring large packets of data, such as speakers, smartwatches, those types of things. So Samsung has implemented a dual speaker setup over Bluetooth Classic. It's not Bluetooth 5. And I don't know how they are doing it, but I can tell you that I have 2 Megaboom speakers. I've had them for a while, and I can connect them simultaneously to my phone. They're not Bluetooth 5 phones either, and I can play mono or stereo sound. And again, both of those speakers are connected and playing at the same time. So it's not a stretch what Samsung has done here. And if you guys would like to know more about this, I'm going to link the videos in the description where Gary talks about this in full. So yes, we have Bluetooth 5 hardware. It's going to be activated once we have Android O, but don't expect that until like the end of the year, maybe the new year, whenever we start getting the updates. But at least the devices are future-proof. Lastly, in this review, let's move on to talking about the cameras. We've got a 12 megapixel camera here on the back, and we've also got an 8 megapixel camera here on the front. Now, I created a video montage for you guys to really show what these cameras are capable of. So we're going to have a version that plays in this video, but it's only at 1080p. I'm going to put a link in the description for the 4K version, or it's going to be linked up here in the little information box. So you can go and see that in its full K glory. You can see all the 4K samples and all the pictures in as high resolution as possible. So please check that out here. It's a fun little montage that's been set to music, and I try to cover every aspect possible. But before we get into that, let's just take a look at the camera interface. I think it's a really nice and clean camera interface. They really want you to swipe to activate things. So swipe, you can access your Pro features. If you swipe downward, you can get to the front-facing camera. If you swipe this way, you can get to filters. And you can even access your stickers and beauty modes. So left-hand side, you can see we've got settings, flash, HDR, you can have it auto on or off. This lets you also switch between the front and the back camera. You see right here you've got access to the Bixby button, so you can use Bixby. You swipe up and down to be able to zoom in. This lets you access the gallery. This lets you start a video. All very, very simple. So for picture size, it's up to 12 megapixels. And the native aspect of the camera is 4:3. We've got up to UHD video at 30 frames per second. You've got tracking autofocus, shape correction. You have a timer. Here's for the front camera. It's also a native 4:3 aspect, 8 megapixel max, and it shoots a max of Quad HD. I know it's 8 megapixels. A lot of people want to know if it can shoot in 4K, but no, it can't. Quad HD is the max. We still have the quick launch ability, so double click and it's going to activate the camera quickly for you. Motion photo, so this is a very Apple-esque type of feature. You've got some settings for the front-facing camera as well, such as wide selfie, selective focus. This is a very full-featured camera. You've got a 240 frames per second slow motion, also the selective focus. Let's take a peek at the Pro mode. So you've got the option for exposure compensation, white balance. You can adjust the Kelvin scale, which is really quite a nice feature. Instead of having to use the presets, I can choose how I want that color temperature to look. You can mess around with the manual focus. Here you have some filters. Here's the shutter speed, with a max of 10 seconds to keep the shutter open. And you can mess around with the ISO as well. I may have forgotten to mention earlier that this has a very wide open aperture of f1.7. So this creates extremely beautiful bokeh. But I do run into some trouble here and there when I'm trying to get some macro shots, and you're going to see all that in my little montage that I'm going to fire up right about now. bruiser. We give him a hard time, but he's really cute. He's a good boy. So I hope that this has been really helpful to you. I really wanted to take at least 2 months to play around with these devices so I could learn everything about them. And it's usually after that 1 month to 2 month mark where little blips in performance start to show up. It's where you start loading things onto the phone. You've really used it and moved into it and it's become cozy. So I don't like doing reviews after just a week or even a few weeks. So we've covered everything here from performance, which you can see is pretty decent. Snapdragon 835 is a really nice SoC. Now Samsung has to go and botch some things. Their TouchWiz is still very, very heavy. It looks nice and clean, but it does bog down performance, it seems. At least the user experience performance. We've taken a look at battery life, and battery life is definitely better on the larger model of the phone. That shouldn't be too much of a surprise. We can say that I can get like an hour longer of use on the larger phone. We've taken a look at connectivity, we've taken a look at Bluetooth 5 and what's going on with that. And we've definitely taken a look at the cameras, and these are some excellent cameras. I don't think anyone is going to be disappointed with them. If you are, get yourself a DSLR, or an SLR, or a professional camera, or whatever. But these are pretty darn good. So this is all that I want to say for now. If you want to see part 1 of the review, click right here. That's going to talk about all the features. And I kid you not, I do talk about like all the features. I think it's like 40 minutes long. So check right here or down in the description. So thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate. Yes, I do mean rate. Rate up or down. Let me know if you liked it or not. Please comment. And above all, I'd really love it if you guys would subscribe. You can hit the little notification bell to make sure that you get notifications for when I upload new videos, which I am now setting on a regular schedule of every weekend. So again, thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked it.